All right, friends and beans, let's go ahead and get started. Sorry. Hey, it. Hey, I don't know what that's about. I am aware I logged into Google account. That's it. All right. So today we're gonna work on some Hex Crawl stuff. We are gonna take a look at Hex Crawl stuff that I was working on that I put together in 2023. So it's been not quite 3 years. Because I think I did it in like November. We'll look at, if I'm smart, I will have dated the document. And we're going to take a look at some of that stuff. And you might be wondering, why am I revisiting something I've already made? Well, the first part is, why did I make it in the beginning? And that's, Hex Crawl systems are interesting. If it's not something that you haven't taken interest in, as far as like the DnD or TTRPG hobby, they are interesting. I feel like is the right word for them. There are a lot of different systems for hex crawling. There are a number of them. I mean, especially when you start going into like OSR style, there are many different hex crawl systems. But the issue that I had for them, the reason that I made my own, was that though there are a lot of different variations, they're all pretty much variations of the same thing. They really aren't that different. And man, do I have a bunch of stuff on my desk. So we're going to look at probably, I'm going to have one out as an example. We'll talk a little bit about it from here to there, which is one of the things we got on Free RPG Day. And I am planning to go into this in more in depth, and we'll do our own little stream about it, talking about this and some other stuff. But it does have hex crawling operations in here, and that was one of the things that when I pulled it up. So there is, I'm probably going to say some not so great things about that, but that's not really representative of this product. It's more representative of hex crawling in general, and I'm just kind of using this one instance as a showcase of that once we get into it. But essentially, they all kind of operate the same, and that's the big part of it. And they've hex crawling, as like the operations and procedures and how to do it, has been very stifled for decades at this point. It's been extremely stifled. And so most of D&D has undergone radical updates. If you look at the difference between how D&D was played and how the game functioned in the 70s compared to what it is today, night and day. Very different style of games, very different, both in the mechanics and in what they're trying to emulate. And I think that hex crawls should also have that same sort of change, and that's a place where I don't think there's been a lot of change. So that's what we're gonna kind of jump into a little bit today. Hey, what's going on, Cutter? Are there dragons now? There's always dragons. Just where are they? And where can we find them? In this hex crawl, the one that was brought up earlier, I don't think that there are no dragons in here. It's all super low. But in most hex crawls, you're gonna come across dragons. Certainly in mine, number of them. Even though I don't really like dragons all that much as a mythical creature, I think they're a little overplayed and not that interesting most of the time. So, but they're a staple of the genre, and the people love the dragons. You got to put the dragons in the game. Okay, so let's just kind of get into what are my, I guess, kind of like core issues. I think that's the best way to put it. What are some of the like core issues I have with the standard hex crawl procedure? We'll look at some of this stuff with this. The first part is they're kind of boring and slow, which are two big sins when they're together. It's okay for things to sometimes be boring. I think it's okay for sometimes things to be slow. But when they're boring and slow, not very good. And most of that is like 90% of the work of a hex crawl, and like who's doing that is the DM. And it's a lot of the DM rolling on tables and doing some math, and the player's just kind of waiting for what happens next. So it's kind of like they're not playing the game for a lot of the time in hex crawls, and the DM's doing a lot of bookkeeping most of the time in hex crawls. So that's one of the things that I kind of want to focus on. Yeah, hex crawl should be updated. I did it again. All right, that should bring it back. Yeah. All right, so now I'm thinking maybe it's this connector. It might actually be this cable that's on the microphone. Maybe that's the issue, because that's just, I just barely touched it, and it clicked over the audio. So that might be the issue. That's probably what the issue is. All right, well, getting a new cable's not a problem. So as long as it's not the actual connector for my mic, that should be a relatively easy fix. I'll have to look into that. I think I got another. Actually, I might not have a cable long enough. Oh, I'm sure I'll find one. If not, I'll get one. All right, where was I? Oh, they're boring and slow. So two things that are kind of sins together. By themselves, not the greatest things in the world, but together, not great for gameplay. It's also like a lot of DM bookkeeping. Here, I know that you guys won't be able to see this, and I don't have, I'm not even sure there is a digital copy of it. I'm sure there probably is. But let me see if I can draw rules. Okay, there we go. So the hex crawl rules are mostly these 2 pages, and you'll see that there are a number of tables, as well as the stuff over here. So even in a small book that's supposed to be played with OSR, which generally has a very rules-light approach, it's still quite a bit. And so most of this is all Dungeon Master or Game Master facing. There's nothing that the players are looking at in here. This is a Dungeon Master Game Master book, and to run this tiny little hex crawl, which there's your area effect. There we go. Just a little valley. That's all it is. So again, this is not representative of this particular product, just using it because it was the closest thing at hand that has kind of standard hex crawl rules when I grabbed it. So it basically tells you there's 2 ways you can do. You can either travel or you can explore hexes. Those are 2 things you can do. Great. And it tells you that each hex is 6 miles across. That's pretty common standard size for hex crawling. And there's reasons why I don't like that, but that's not for this discussion. That's about map scaling. Roughly 1/3 of the hexes contain something of interest, divided into 3 categories: landmarks, hidden, and secrets. So hidden features and secrets. And landmark features are automatically found when a hex is entered, while both hidden and secret features can only be found if the hex is searched. Hidden features are automatically uncovered upon a thorough search, but discovery or secret features left to a die roll or a triggering event. That kind of gets into like stuff. So now you've got like 3 different types of things, categories of things. So you have to keep those straight in addition to while you're running it. So every time that they walk into a new hex that has something, you have to know what that thing, category that falls into, and remember that. Which, and for something that you might only be doing every once in a while, is a little bit hard, I think, to remember. Especially, I'm not sure these are the greatest names in the world. I'm also not a huge fan of having points of interest in hexes that people can't find. I don't know why that's a gameplay mechanic that we OSR especially is latched onto. I don't think that's fun. There's nothing worse than like having to spend a bunch of time and resources researching the hex again and again and again, knowing that something's in this hex or likely is to be in this hex, but not being able to find it because you keep rolling low. That's not fun, I don't think. Because the idea is like it's the idea of like failing forward, right? So if you need the party to get through this locked door to get to the rest of the adventure, then there's no point in really having any of the player characters roll for getting through the door, whether it's breaking the door down or taking the lock or whatever, because you need them to get through. Because if they don't get through, then you're not able to do the thing. And that's sort of how I feel about hex crawling points of interest. It's like if there's something in the hex and you say that we're going to spend the time to look to actively and thoroughly search through the hex, I think it's reasonable to be like, your adventures, this is a thing you do. You are kind of explorers and finders. This is within your skill set. I think you should just probably find that thing. Unless there's a very specific reason, like if it was like invisible or something like that, or had something very, very specific, or is hidden in a very specific way, then I could think of maybe, yeah, maybe you need extra information, or you would at least get closer to where you need to be if you didn't find it outright. But I'm not sure that I like that format. So it's a lot of that. There's a lot of DM bookkeeping like that. There are 6 mile hexes, and then this whole entire bottom thing is like travel pace and how fast you go compared to how many miles you can travel based off of the type of terrain you're in, which goes from, let's say that you're so we'll say that the standard rate is 30, even though that is literally the slowest you can go in here. So I think that obviously the OSR movement rate rules must be slightly different for land speed. So if that was the case, maybe it's technically 60 because you're doing nothing but walking. If that was the case, then you would get through 12 miles of light forest, which is 2 hexes. Or you'd get through 9 miles of heavy forest, so a hex and a half. And that's another problem that I have. And then if you're on the road, you get through 15 hexes, which is 3 and some change. Or sorry, 2 hexes and some change. 2.5 hexes. There we go. And that's where I find that these systems kind of fail. Is like at any point, if I have to start getting into fractions or decimal points while I'm trying to count that out as a DM, then I feel like the hex mapping system, like the hex crawling procedures aren't working then. If I'm having to figure out, okay, but you're 4 miles into this hex, so when you pick up traveling into the next hex, you have to spend 2 miles into this hex, and now I have to figure out how much time that is for this hex and how much time it'll take you to get through the next hex. It's also weird that they set it up in miles per day, which is not usually it's you're like hourly. I don't know why they've chosen it in this specific product to interpret it that way. But as you can see, it gets into a lot of DM bookkeeping very, very quickly. It's like a lot of stuff that you need to take care of. You like games with a bit more mechanical consequences, but most of the live plays focus on narrative and skirt the consequences for fun. I get, but at the point of play something else. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to leave stuff up to the dice, you try to leave it up to the dice as much as you can. I try to make that come through in my solo play stuff. Maybe it doesn't. But usually it's like, I'm obviously on my character's sides, but hey, sometimes you try to cross a river and you lose your freaking boat. And you have to go chase down your boat. And that's the consequence. And there's a chance that you might not catch the boat and the boat's just gone. Luckily, that happened, but we did catch the boat. So we are okay there. But, you know, as soon as I put that on the table, it's on the table. Like, we could lose the boat, and losing the boat would be really bad. In an area that's got a big lake in it, that means having to walk around the big lake or finding a ferry or something that will take us across it. Another thing that's really weird about this, going with like the miles per day and pace and things like that, is that it does a very strange thing, is that it creates this assumption that the party is always going to be spending the same amount of time traveling each day. Like, usually they assume like 10 hours of walking in a day, and I was like, that's a lot of walking. I don't know if you've tried to walk for 10 miles a day for multiple days in a row, but it's really tiring, especially if you have a whole bunch of stuff on your back and you're not like on a road, but like cutting your way through a forest or a jungle or over rough terrain. Like it's not a good time. It's not fun. And if it's hot, it's awful. And if it's cold, it's also awful. So basically it just kind of sucks. And most people don't actually move that fast. There's also, so there's no quantities about like how long you're going to be traveling and the pace at which you're doing that, which is not very realistic in a game that's trying to, in its own way, enforce an amount of realism, but also making your travel and supplies and like known quantities. You know that, oh, we have 13 days of rations of water or whatever. And the truth is that you don't always use, they're not like pre-packaged boxed lunches. Like you don't always use the same amount of food and water depending on what you're doing. Like, hey, if it's hot, you're gonna drink more water. Hey, some days you're gonna eat more than other days. Some days you're gonna drink more water than other days, depending on what you're doing. Especially if you're going like uphill or downhill, or having to cut your way through a whole bunch of stuff. Like it's all very different. So I don't really like having these ideas that like the players, because the players have these ideas about like how long they're going to travel every day, the exact pace that they're going to have that travel of, and the exact supplies that they have this idea about now the game's really, it's really boring because there's not really any choices. There's nothing to be surprised by in the actual procedures aspect of it, which I don't like about it. I think that's a very boring aspect of play. And then really the only thing that about that in a second. But these are like the sort of reasons why I started implementing a different system. Like this is why one of the reasons I use resource dice, because it's like sometimes animals get into your supplies. Sometimes your supplies go bad. Sometimes you lose them along the trail or you eat too much or whatever. Because it's not like portioned out like they're MREs or anything like that. It doesn't, those supplies don't work in the same way. It becomes just this game of counting hexes. And so choosing the pace that you're going to move at and the path to wherever you're trying to go, wherever the party's trying to get to, is the only real gameplay for players in most hex crawl systems. Like that's the only thing they're really doing. It's sort of like, I guess it reminds me, probably because it's the last game I played with fast travel in it, it reminds me of playing Kingdom Come Deliverance and being like, okay, I want to travel to this town, and then you just click on it, and then you wait to see if your guy's going to get there or something happens on the road while he's on his way. And it's like nothing else is really ever happening. There's no other decisions you make. There's no other things. There's no chance that you're going to get lost along the way or anything. Now, that's a little bit different because you're fast traveling, so you're moving across roads anyways. But I mean, other than random events popping up, there's nothing else that happens. And the hex crawling does feel a lot like that as a player sometimes. It's like the only thing I do is be like, okay, well, that's where we're trying to get to. And I think the easiest path to get there is through here and here, assuming that your Dungeon Master or Game Master has put the map down in front of you, which they usually do. They usually have a blank map in front of you, which is also a thing that I don't generally do when I'm hex crawling. I'm like, oh, you probably don't actually know the surroundings, or else you wouldn't really be hex crawling. Because hex crawling is about exploring and finding out things and that discovery aspect of the game. So the players are just kind of doing that. They're picking their path, and then they're just kind of waiting, while the rest of the time the DM is looking at charts, they're rolling on tables, they're doing math, and they're rolling for random events, and they're doing all that work. They're doing that 90% of the work, and the players are just kind of waiting for the game to happen to them. So, yeah, I mean, those are the big kind of systemal issues that I have with hex crawls, for the most part. I mean, there's one other thing that I also think is a big thing, but that's more of a personal gripe with it and not really a system thing. I deal with the consequences as well, but yeah, focus on the show and way less on the mechanics. Yeah, I guess that's true. There's a live play that's supposed to be a horror setting in a live show, and they're turning it into comedy. Yeah. Well, I mean, I watched the Dimension 20 World of Darkness Vampire the Masquerade game, which is, I mean, you're tuning into a comedy podcast, so it's going to be a comedy podcast. But I do know that that one got very mixed results because a lot of people were like, "Oh, these people are just not really playing the game." Like, yeah, they're not really doing that, and it's fun. Like, I enjoyed it, but it was also like it could have been different, and it could have been serious, and it could have had some real moments in it, and instead it was just, how many jokes per minute can we put in there? What's the JPM of every episode? How can we get those JPMs up? Which is a very different thing. So, bit of a letdown. Not that I didn't enjoy the season. Just wasn't what I was expecting going into it. I was expecting another one of Dimension 20's very rare, but darker, slightly more serious seasons. Yeah, and turning into comedy, which is fine for a sandbox setting, but if you want to play a horror setting, then it's just dumb for you. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I understand. I don't watch a ton of horror media in general, because I think horror is really, really hard to pull off. I think it's really hard to pull off, especially in a medium like a TTRPG. I think it's really hard. It's kind of like, for me, and I think a lot of people have this issue, like reading a book. Like, I have trouble getting actually scared reading a book. Like, there are words on a page. It's not, I don't think it translates scary in that kind of way. I think it works better for like existential cosmic horror. I think that stuff works a lot better for it, where it's a more thinky kind of horror. But like just that primal fear, jump scare kind of stuff doesn't really work for it. Compared to something like a movie, which I think does that much, much better. This media. And for the last part that's like beyond the system, the other thing that I also generally have a gripe with, and this one does it as well. Let's just go back to that same table. There's other tables in here, but this is the one that's the big one. So this is like, okay. So again, this movement pace is very strange. It goes all the way up to 180 feet, and I'm like, but in what time period? I don't know. This is probably because this is mostly for OSE and Briark, and that's probably why that pace is like that. But I'm like, is that in a round? Is that in? Can't be an exploration turn. So you're like, what does that mean? But according to this, you should be able to walk, if you're on a road, up to 45 miles in a day. If you're in a heavy forest, up to 27 miles a day. And if you're in a light forest, up to 36 miles in a day. It's like, it's one of the things that I generally have an issue with a lot of these systems, is that it makes it really clear that most Hex Crawl systems are not made by people that have a lot of outdoor experience. Because as somebody who's done quite a bit of like camping and backpacking in their life, be like, you are not going to be moving that fast, especially not with all that stuff on your back, especially not on like a graded trail or road. You're just not like 45 miles on a road in a day. So again, that pace might be horse, but even for horse, that's pushing it. That's like a double pace for a horse. That's like doing nothing but riding hard. That's because you're getting into like Pony Express kind of territory, where you're like, you have to do station riding, or what do they call it? They call it like switch riding. Something where it's like every time you ride only for like 10 miles or something, and you reach a station, you have to swap horses because the horses can't keep going that hard. And so you're constantly just swapping horses and running and galloping them and switching horses so they can stay fresh, so you can keep moving quickly. But that's not what you're going to be doing in Hex Crawling. There's not going to be built stations with horses ready for you to swap out for. So I think it really overestimates how far and fast parties can move over rough ground in any amount of time. And I think most of that comes from they rely on like historical accounts of marching armies, which is not really a transferable thing. Like marching armies don't march through rain, they march along roads. And it also misses the point where any marching armies generally only march like 2 to 3 days and then have a rest day. So you have to take that pace and like add another day to it before you divide it. So if you took that standard pace, we're not going to use the horse pace because that's insane. But a more normal pace, like even something like this, like 23 is pretty high, 23 miles on a road, but could be doable. Like you can do that in a day. But that's basically, that is pretty much doing nothing but walking for about 10 hours. Assuming that you are loaded down, because it's really much closer to about backpacking pace is about 2 miles an hour, even though average walking pace is about 3 miles an hour, because you have a bunch of crap on your back, generally not accounted for in those pacings. But let me do the math right here. So we got 23, and if we were going to do that according to the system, if you were doing that for 4 days, you'd go 92 miles. But the truth is that you would have 23 times 3, or yeah, we'll say 23 times. So divided by 4, which is actually much closer to, because assuming that you're going to take one of those camp day rests, because you're going to need them, much closer to 17 miles a day as a pace, which makes, I mean, that's still quick. That's still no slouch by any means. You're still walking hard, but is definitely doable. That's a lot more doable than 23 miles in a day. That's 6 miles less. But that's at least 2 hours less of walking, closer to 3. And again, those days kind of take into, all right, well, if you were going to do nothing but walk all day, you got to stop to eat, you got to stop to rest, you stop for water breaks, you stop all the time when you're doing things like backpacking and walking for that long. You have to. You don't take long rests usually. You're not going to take a super long rest, but you do take pretty consistent, like 5 to 15-minute rests every 1 to 2 hours, maybe every 3 hours, depending on how fit everybody is and how hard the terrain is, how tired everybody gets, where everybody stops and has water. You recheck your bearings, what you're doing, making sure everybody feels okay and keep going. Do a check-in with everybody, kind of stuff. All that kind of stuff that is not modeled in hex crawling. Most hex crawling isn't. And I'm not saying that we need to. I'm not sure that that's the point. I'm not trying to make a one-for-one backpacking model. But I do think that it is helpful to know the fallacies of using things like marching armies, which are always going to be going across roads, and they're always going to be doing like a march pace. And often those guys are only carrying like a little bit of supplies on their back, only for a few days. And they also have a baggage train with them that carries all the heavy stuff. They're not carrying everything on their back. So very, very different. So it's not a super transferable system. All right, well, let's talk about sort of my aims. I guess before we do that, let's you know what, I'm going to swap the mood. Since we are going to be working on some stuff today, I am going to focus, I'm going to listen to my own. I'm going to let that go. I'm going to listen to some of my own music. I'll share it for us. Oh, wait, in case you guys want to listen along. There we go. So we've got Galura Inner Sanctum from 2025, some classic dungeon synth. We got a little bit of Fog Weaver after that, and then and it's just gonna be a dungeon synth kind of day, I guess, because I'm working on DnD stuff. I like to keep it on theme sometimes. So, and then I've got Fog Weaver, the Veternon I've listened to, or Vadernon. Yeah, I've listened to many times. But and this dungeon synth 2-hour one I've listened to part of. Obviously, I haven't. Ooh, catch back up. But yeah, that's what we're gonna do today. But let's go ahead and throw you guys over to the actual document. That's not the right thing. Are you showing me that? That's what I want. There we go. There we go. All right. This is our hex crawling operation stuff from 2023. From November. There we go. So let me talk a little bit about the designs of this hex crawling system when I was making it. What am I trying to actually do with it compared to my gripes that I had about hex crawling? One, I want to make crawling a little bit more realistic, not a ton. Like it's again, I'm not trying to make a super country system. I'm trying to make something that's just a little bit more realistic, a little bit more ambiguous. Like I said, one of the things I struggle with is like the pacing and having consistent pace and having consistent supplies and having a lot of known values as a player. I want to turn those into more ambiguous things that can change. I want them to be more varied. I want it to be less uniformity. I want it not to be monolithic because if you ever have a party and you have like the super frail wizard and like the super buff barbarian and the very sort of like life, let's say monk or ranger, like those people don't move the same way. Like their bodies don't work the same way. Some of those people are going to be better at walking all day than other people. So, but hex crawling does not consider that at all. Most systems do not consider that in all, other than being like, oh well, the halfling has short legs, so he's slower, so he has a slower pace than everybody. That's not okay, but it's still a known quantity. Like it still doesn't make any difference either. It just means that everybody's going to have to go at the halfling's pace. All right. Well, usually that's not a big enough deal to make it feel like everybody else is going at light pace or a relaxed pace. They don't get any benefit for going slower. Or you force the like halfling to go faster and it's not fast enough that they have to do a fast pace. So it's actually not important at all most of the time. But I want it to be like, okay, each player character within the party has their own thing, and that stuff is limiting on that. So if you have the frail wizard in your party, that's the person who's likely going to be the person who's going to make you have to stop more often because they're the one who's going to get tired most of the time. It's not going to be the beefy barbarian with his 16 constitution score or the monk with a 14 con. Like they're fine. They can keep moving. It's going to be your spellcasters are usually going to be your slow ones. Your warlocks and your wizards and all those other guys. Also wanted to model more things like reasons for getting hirelings and beasts and vehicles and like that's not in this hex crawling system. It's in some hex crawling systems for sure. They talk about generally it just allows you to improve your pace. That's about it. But I was like, okay, but I want it to be important. I want it to be like, oh, you can get hirelings. You can have people who can carry your stuff for you, or you get animals to carry your stuff for you, or they carry you, or vehicles, which will do both. But vehicles also have the option being like, there's some places like that heavy forest area they're not going to be able to get through. They're very terrain dependent. If you need to be able to feed your animals, they also need water and stuff. So having those aspects as well. I also want to increase that player involvement. Like I said, one of the issues I have with most common hex crawls is that the players are generally kind of sitting around twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the DM to finish rolling on charts and trying to figure out which hex they're moving through and how many hours they spend in the day traveling and doing that stuff. Like that stuff, I want them to have more focus on like getting the right preparation, making sure they have the right gear to do stuff, giving them opportunities to roll dice, giving them something that's in the system that makes RP like a useful aspect instead of just kind of a flavor thing. What if RP was actually useful for hex crawling? Trying to get other people involved who might otherwise not be very interested, both players and player characters, in hex crawling, in like moving through that exploration phase of the game. And especially when it comes to things like 5e, and like you don't have to deal with this as much when you're playing it like an OSR, like an OSE or Briarch or like that, because they have plenty. They focus on that a lot more. But especially in contemporary D&D, we have a ton of utility spells that are specifically for traveling. But if you don't run any amount of hex crawling or overland travel, those spells are worthless to pick up as a spellcaster. So I'm like, I want these utility spells to be useful. These are things that you pick up and you use in the game, and they're like, oh, like a good example of something that's not very good in 5e. I think we can find it. I think it's just Longstrider. Primarily because it does this. This is the part. Um, uh, yeah. That's the big problem. It's like Longstrider sounds like otherwise it'd be a really great spell. Something that lets you move faster. Yeah, especially for overland travel. It only lasts for an hour though, and only works on one creature. So when you're looking at this, it's like you have to have a very specific reason why somebody in your party needs specifically 10 more feet of speed. That's a really, really specific spell. But if it was something like summon speeds is a good one that doesn't ever get picked up very often in 5e, but it's like that's an incredibly useful spell if you're doing some actual hex crawling. You're like, oh, the ability that you can summon speeds and not have to worry about like having all the tack for them, having enough food and water for them, being like, okay, we got to the dungeon or whatever location we're going at, and we don't have anybody to babysit them while we go in there, because the only thing that's got more deaths in D&D than player characters are their mounts. When they get to the dungeon, they're like, "Well, we just leave them out there. Just leave them tied up." And it's like, "Okay, well, some sort of predator comes and, like, is gonna eat them probably because you just left horses lashed up somewhere by themselves. Or you don't leave them lashed up and they just run away because something probably came after them. And I wanted a system that was going to allow me to improvise the hexes and the contents of the hexes while I was playing. So it was like I don't have to one of the struggles about hex crawls is that you usually have to prepare the entire hex map before you drop people into it. And then so if you're doing it as a campaign as Dungeon Master, certainly I know that and I still do that. Um, is create a map and know what all the points of interest are going to be in the map before you start playing. That's a lot of front loading a lot of Dungeon Master work. Now, once you start playing, it's actually not that much prep that you have to do most of the time because you're like, oh, I've kind of prepped everything. So only as they get closer to very specific points of interest that I might want to flesh out a little bit more. That'll be this kind of stuff I do between sessions, but otherwise, I don't need to prep that much if you're running a sandbox like that. It's like you really don't need to prep that much, especially if you don't know what direction the players are going to go into. You can't prep dozens of different points of interest, dungeons of different adventure locations and dungeons and storylines and plots and all that stuff. Like you just can't do that. But at least if you have a strong foundation for what that's going to be by doing that front loaded work, it's like, okay, once they hit there, I can read the description and be like, okay, based off of what's happening in the campaign, here's what I think the situation would be once they get there and do that. But I do like the idea that I could sit down if I wasn't doing a hex crawl thing previously and be like, okay, we can hit the table. I'll know how to fill out those hexes with different types of terrain. I'll know how to figure out whether there are points of interest in there and go from there. And then have some ideas to be able to where I could like pull in other stuff and work with it. All right. That's that. Let's just, I think at this point, let's just kind of like quickly go over this. We don't need to spend a ton of time going over this because we're going to go over most of it. But we'll go over this before we start making changes to it. We'll get into the nitty gritty of everything. A lot of preamble, but I think it does well if you're not familiar with hex crawls to set up all that stuff before as to like how we got to this step. So original, why I created the 2023 version that we're looking at, and why I'm making changes to it again. As with anything that I make, and I think most things that Dungeon Masters or Game Masters put together, the resource is never truly done. It's always kind of a work in progress. All right, so this is we're going to go ahead and update this. So it is now 08/26. All right, so the 2d6 biome variation table, we looked at this in the last stream because we were doing stuff off of it. All right, we have a mountain, we got that 10% chance for So this is all pretty standard. I've changed this, so we're gonna just delete that already. So we have the 2d6. Like I said, one of the things that I wanted is a way to drop in. That's fine. One of the things I wanted to do is I wanted a way to be like I could just start running a hex crawl from scratch if I needed to. If I just was like, you guys, if I needed to improv a session right off the hand, be like, you're in a village. It's got 500 people in there, which means you can buy anything up to 50 gold in price, including healing potions. Where do you guys want to go? And then they would just start moving into hexes, and I would set whatever the parent hex is, whatever like the general area is, and then just start rolling off of this. And then from the hex they were in, as they moved into the next one, I would just keep rolling using that previous hex as the parent. So it can move very quickly into a lot of other biomes, which is maybe not super realistic, but for something that I'm kind of coming off the top of my head, I like that a little bit better, so things will be nice and varied. Very easy. So we looked at this yesterday, or at least a very similar version of this same table. We were yesterday. On Tuesday, we were doing our mapping stuff. So +2 dryer, +1 dryer, same as previous hex, a +1 verdant, +2 verdant, wetlands, and water. We were messing with that aspect. We were messing with wetlands, coastal wetlands this time. And then we have the morning travel prep. So when they decide that they want to go hex crawling, what does that do? Well, if they've woken up in the morning, they're going to update the calendar date very easily. It's the next day. Write that down. Update the weather and adjust. I guess we'd say like DCs. DCs as necessary. DCs less. Again, now I'm already immediately getting into the editing portion. Let's just go through it. I'm gonna stop myself. I'm gonna stop myself. Take my hands off the keyboard. There we go. All right. So we're gonna update the weather. We're gonna adjust those DCs rolls as necessary because it's like, hey, if it's raining, that's important. If we need to know that it's difficult to see things, so disadvantage on perception checks, and if it's heavy rain, even hearing perception checks, and your ability to your pace will suffer because you're just like slogging through the mud now. That nature, you'll set the travel paces. This has changed already. You apply advantage or disadvantage for your mounts or your morale, etc. You have things that are going to make you go faster. And then you're going to begin the day. You're going to choose a hex crawl action. So in this hex crawl system, there's basically 3 things you can choose once you're hex crawling. You can choose to search the current hex or a point of interest. If you do that, you're going to spend an amount of time looking through the hex, combing it to see if you can find a point of interest if it's in there. If there is something in there, you're going to find it automatically. There's no chance you're going to fail this roll. Like I talked about previously, I don't like that as a system, so I don't use it. The second thing you can do is you can travel to the next hex. You're like, okay, well, we're going to keep moving west or whatever the direction is that they're heading. We're gonna move into the next hex. Great. And notate that they're moving on the map, and we'll start rolling some dice and get into that. Or the third thing they can do is they can decide to end their travel day. They're like, we've been going pretty well. We've got one person who's got a point of exhaustion. There's no reason. We're not under any strain to kind of keep pushing it. So we're going to go ahead and end our day here. At which point it sends you to the camp section. So +1d4 pace. This is where the system really changes, how it's very, very different. So you set that DC up at the beginning. You set your travel pace. I've changed the names of some of that. So right now that's called an effort DC, which is fine. I just change it to just like how hale are you for the day? How prepared for travel are you? And so every time that you take an action, you're going to roll a D4. So if you decide to search the current hex, we're going to roll a D4. If you decide to travel to the new hex, we're going to roll a D4. If you end your travel day, we don't roll a D4. That's the end of the day. You're not moving. You decided to go to camp, bed down for the night. So you're going to apply any situational modifiers for advantage or disadvantage for the weather and the terrain. If you're sneaking around, if you got extra gear that lets you do things better, or spells or whatever, that you're going to increase the travel pace. So it starts off at 0 at the beginning of the day because that's how much energy you've expended. Then we'll add a D4 to that. Every action you take after that, we're going to add more d4s. At some point, you are going to hit whatever this travel pace is. So let's say that it's 13, and that's probably going to get you through about 5 hexes. So that's what you'll go through most of the time, on average, assuming that nothing else modifies any of those rolls. You'll increase that travel pace, so you'll go into the first hex, you'll roll that d4. Second hex, you'll roll another d4 and add sum those two together. Usually going to be on average 5. Once you go through 4, it'll be on average 10. And then if you got through 6, it'd be an average of 15. Usually by the time you start getting into the mid-teens is when people start failing those rolls. And that is pushing. So if you get to the point where the pace that you have now outstrips the set pace that you have, this is why I changed the names. The effort DC. If the amount of energy that you put out is above that DC, now you have to start making active Constitution saving throws against that pace. That pace then becomes the DC. If you fail that, you take a point of exhaustion or level of exhaustion. If you decide to keep pushing, you can keep pushing yourself to keep going forward. You keep making the pace will increase. You'll make a con save against the new DC. If you fail again, you take another level of exhaustion. So it's really about like, I'm tired, but we got to get to the place that we're getting to, or it's a very specific place that we're trying to get to. Maybe we have a timed element. We're really going to push ourselves to like keep moving throughout this day before we take a camp arrest. Or we're like, this place seems really dangerous, so we're going to find a better place to camp or something like that. It could be any number of reasons why they might want to push. Or maybe they're only like 1 or 2 hexes away from their actual destination. They're like, let's just push and get there instead of having a camp day out here. Maybe it's just better if we just push and get there, and then we can check into an inn or whatever, wherever they're going. If it was a town, they know it's close. So what happens when you enter a new hex? A new hex. Okay. You're gonna make that pace roll with that 1d4. Then you're gonna roll a 1d12 for an encounter roll. That's how I do that. If you roll a 1, you're gonna get some sort of wandering monster. Generally, that's gonna be a combat encounter, but it doesn't always have to be. And if you roll a 12, you're gonna get some form of wilderness dressing, which is usually not a creature encounter. And if it is, it's usually a docile one or a very like can be like a social encounter. But again, not always. Sometimes that will also be a fight, depending on what the situation is, and often what the player characters do, what the party decides to do during that situation. So after you figure out whether there's an encounter or not, if there's an encounter, you run the encounter. If there's not an encounter, you go directly into the POI occurrence. So this is the chance that you might accidentally run across something. So you're just going to stumble across some sort of point of interest in there because you're not actively looking for it. If that's the case, you roll a 1d20, depending on what type of hex you are. It's going to be some sort of result between 1 and 5. We'll say, yes, you found a point of interest if there's a point of interest there. This would be the same thing that we would do if you were running this just fresh, just improving it off the top of your dome. You would do this. You'd be like, okay, we're going to roll a d20. If you rolled, maybe a 3, you'd be like, yeah, you find a point of interest, and then we'd roll on the point of interest table, which is further down. That POI occurrence. Or you can choose to search the hex. If you're searching the hex directly, you roll a d6 to determine if there is anything there or not. So if you roll this is where it's a little bit different than the previous situation where it's like you might not find something and there might still be something there. This is like you search this thoroughly enough to know that either, yes, you have found a point of interest, or you know for certain there is not a point of interest in here. Again, there's always outliers. There is always the chance that, like, if you wanted to add something that was, like, magically hidden, or there's some sort of other magical effect that's going on, there might be some reason that's something specific that's obscuring them from finding stuff. But in general, the rule of thumb should be is, like, they either find the thing or they know there's not a thing here. And there shouldn't be a lot of ambiguity around that, because that's not fun, because you don't want your players to keep searching for a place just to confirm that there is nothing there, or keep searching for a place and continue to fail it knowing that something is supposed to be there. Both of those are very frustrating and not really a fun gameplay experience. And then the difference is like if you're in a water hex, you roll a d10 for that instead of a d. So there's less likely to be points of interest in water hexes. And then if you're on the open ocean hexes, it's a d100. So really unlikely to find something there. So if you're in the Heartlands, this is where my mapping stuff starts interjecting itself. So if you're in the Heartlands area, which is the area where there's like a whole bunch of civilization, the cradle of civilization, there's you get a result of a point of interest on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So when you're rolling a d6, that means most of the time there's going to be a point of interest in that area. If you're on a water hex, there's about a 50% chance that there's going to be some sort of point of interest there. And if you're in the ocean, there's a 5% chance that there's going to be something there. Now, once you get further out, you get into the frontier or the marches. There's only a 1, 2, or 3 as a result, so then it becomes a 50%, a 30%, or a 3%. And then once you get out into the far-flung wilds, there's only a 1 in 6 chance, a 1 in 10 chance, or a 1 in 100 chance that you'll find something there. Just to make sure that there are plenty of areas, so if you're out on the water, you're less likely to find adventure locations. It's also because I don't want to run a lot of water locations. Sure, we could put stuff under the water, but as somebody who's running in a campaign, or I should say playing in a campaign that is mostly underwater, it's kind of a pain in the butt. And the Dungeon Master is laments his decision to run so much of it underwater. He's like, it is a pain in the butt to run D&D. D&D is not meant to function underwater for any amount of time. It's not good for it. The game's not really built for it. So if the answer is yes, you go to a point of interest. Occurrence, this is the thing that I was just talking about with the Heartlands, your marches, and your wilds. So I just explained that table. And that you confirm things are empty if you don't find anything at this point. Then we got our point of interest theme. This is just kind of giving you an idea about what you find. So let's say that you find something in the marches. You know that you're going to roll a 1d20 on the POI, point of interest type. Slightly different. We'll be like, okay, we're going to roll a d6. Let's say that we get natural. We know that we got something that's on the natural. You can roll on this. This is kind of, you can do this stuff. This is so ingrained in me now because I use it all the time that I don't really have to think about this very much. But the first time you use this, it'll be a little slow, but then once you start using it, speed up real quickly. It'll start to make sense. The idea is that I try to make these tables so that they make enough like logical sense that you'll start to be able to understand how they work without having to reference the table. Like you'll know, hey, if you're in the Heartlands, you're much more likely to come across artificial themed stuff than natural themed stuff. This is where most people live. And so what's on the artificial table, you're more likely to run across constructs and giants and humanoids and oozes and undead. But if you are out here, if you're in the wilds, you're more likely to run across natural things. Those being beasts and dragons and elementals and monstrosities and plant monsters. Those are the themes, so depending on, I use those, whether those can be the monsters that are there or just trying to give a little flavor to the point of interest itself. And weird things show up everywhere. They are consistent across wherever you are. Those are going to be aberrations, celestials, phase, and fiend theme to me. So they're going to do that. So let's say we had that thing in the marches, and we rolled natural. Let's say that we rolled monstrosity. Sure, why not? We'll pick the vaguest one, monstrosity. And we'd roll our d20 on this table. Let's say we rolled, just because I don't know what it is off the top of my head, 17. A wandering monster. So there's going to be some sort of wandering monstrosity. So now I think gnolls used to be monstrosities. They're fiends now. I think like Boule fall into that. So maybe you come across a wandering Boule. There you go. So there you go. That would be an easy way to sort of like bring that up. And it's like, oh, there's some And as you move into that area, if you come across NPCs, they'll be able to tell you that, hey, there are these weird monsters that keep like these weird furrows and the grounds keep shaking. They can give you these telegraphing sensory inputs that like, hey, there's something that's going on in this area. And if you have horses or beasts of burden, well, they might want to make a little snack of those. So it might be likely to attack you, those sorts of things. So very easy to like pull a wandering monster into that and think like, oh, this is not a thing that has a layer here. It's not here for a long time. It's here for a good time. That good time is trying to kill you and your friends. And so that's what it does. So that's most of this. Then we get down here and we talk a little bit about the camp, which has its own sort of mechanics where I talked about trying to bring in some of that RP aspect of it. Have I seen Matthew Tapp's Barrow Mail game? No, I'm not familiar with that. It's chock-a-block with tables. Chock full of them. Yeah, tables are good. I like tables. Uh, I like I like tables. I don't like too many tables. I should put it that way. It's one of the things that keeps me using from the Tome of Adventure Design, because that book is mostly tables. To the point where it's just like I feel like all I'm doing is actually rolling on tables, and like the pieces don't, at least when I try to use that book, it doesn't feel like the pieces are more than the sum of its parts. It just feels like the sum of its parts. I feel like I have a lot of Lego and I don't know how they fit together. So I like tables, but I'm real picky about tables. But no, I'm not familiar with Barrow Mail. Check it out. So when we get down to camp days, the party decides they're gonna end that travel day. They're gonna set camp. They're gonna roll for their supply dice. It's how to use that resource die. So each one of them will roll their resource die. As long as they roll anything but a 1, they're good. If they roll a 1, that die size goes down, increases. They start to notice that like, oh, I don't have as many resources as I thought I did. I don't have as many rations. I also tend to roll rations and water in together as one thing that's just like supplies. Because in most outside of the desert, finding fresh water is not that difficult for venturing, and I'm not sure that the search for water is generally an interesting mode of play for most people. I don't think most people want to spend a bunch of time trying to find and then determine whether water is potable or not. I think once in a while that's fun. Like once in a while they know that like the local water source has been poisoned, so that their ability to find water becomes like a kind of important thing. But I don't think that most people really want to play a game where they're actively having to look for water all the time. And I'm not sure they do. I'm sure that's fun. And like I said, it's potable water in like a fantasy kind of situation is pretty easy to find, assuming that again, it's kind of like searching through the hexes, that I assume that by nature of being adventurers, you are somewhat skilled at doing things like traveling over land. So not even the thing that I would require a wilderness survival for. Now, that would be different if we were running something like on Athos, if we were going to run like Dark Sun, and not like the new Dark Sun, which doesn't have slavery, and they think Dark Sun seems to be only about hyper violence, which is not really my understanding of Dark Sun. I don't think it's a lot of people's older understanding of Dark Sun, where it's more about like trying to find water on Athos is a problem. Like that's a big part of the game. Like just trying to be able to get enough food and water to get through the day is a big part of that gameplay. Like it is a very survivalist gameplay. But that is a very specific setting that is very focused on that. I think in general adventuring people. So I'm like, yeah, I don't care that much about it. That's why I'm like, I like the supply die, where you don't know that you have 13 days of rations left. You're like, I think that I've got a general idea about how many rations I have, but I don't know for sure because again, they're not like single serve packages. But like we have a big like we have an like a little travel arc of like oats or flour or something like that, and it's like that's what we use to make our food with. And so sometimes we use more, sometimes we use less. We don't measure it out uniformly all the time. Sometimes we eat more, sometimes we eat less. And then gives you the ability to be like, well, if you also do foraging throughout the day, whenever you do something like a supply dice roll, you might be able to roll with advantage, which means it's very unlikely that you're going to roll a one most of the time. It's also one of the ways that I do treasure sometimes. Is like if the party finds a whole bunch of foodstuffs, like you can roll your resource die, and if you roll the max value, you go up. Like you found enough supplies that are the type of supplies you need to replenish some of your rations and supplies. Just to make it fun, so like they're always searching. They get to roll dice. It's fun for them, not knowing, not being totally sure about what they can do in a day or how far they can get. Because if I create that ambiguity in the system, then there are going to be a lot more opportunities in that play where the players are going to have to make a meaningful choice about, do we continue forward? Should we stop moving? Should we take a camp day so we can recover levels of exhaustion? Should we, um, if we could recover those levels of exhaustion, these two characters over here who don't have any levels of exhaustion can go foraging for food, and we can see if we can replenish some of our food, and that would be great too. So that way we won't run out of supplies while we're going. Do we want to keep pushing so that way we can get to a very specific place, even though we might be more tired when we get there, which is unfortunate because as we go through there, again, we're going to be looking for random encounters. So there is a chance where it's like, well, if we really push on and we get like that third level of exhaustion where we have disadvantage on attacks and saves, we run into a fight, it's going to be really bad. We're not going to probably do very well in that fight. It could be really dangerous. So, but if we need to get there fast, that might just have to take the chance on it. So then it becomes this like very thoughtful exercise about like, okay, do we keep moving? Do we stay here? Do we try to do something else? Do we try to do those kinds of aspects? That's the kind of stuff that I kind of keep putting into it. Then, having optional morale boosting actions. So setting that skill DC for the final, which is the final day's pace. So it's like at the long end of a long day, if you guys have pushed yourself a whole bunch, and let's say that DC is up at like 17, you're like, oh, you can make any skill checks if you want to, um, and you guys need to decide, hey, is everybody going to participate or not? If everybody says, yay, and everybody figures out what kind of morale boosting actions they want to do in camp. Somebody's like, "Oh, well, I'm going to do the cooking," so they're going to make their like cook utensils check against that DC. Another person's like probably like the bard or something like that is be like, "Oh, I'm going to do performance, so I'll do some like singing and I'll play the lute around the campfire to like raise everybody's spirits and like get everybody nice and relaxed and stuff like that, and feeling good about stuff." If you are, let's say, the fighter and you're like, I don't really know what to do, but I do have smithing tools. Can I use those to like repair people's gear? And I'll be like, yep, absolutely. So you spend some time around the campfire, pull out your little tools, and you help repair different people's gear within the camp. Uh, and doing those sorts of things. And if more people pass than fail, they get advantage on the next day's pace. There is a chance, though, if they try to do it and everybody ends up just rolling poorly, that they might have disadvantage where everybody just wakes up in a bad mood. This might be a thing that I change because something else. Sometimes I like to use, because I use the 2014 exhaustion rules, and sometimes I have a half step to the first exhaustion level, which is you only have disadvantage on either physical or mental ability checks, not saves, not attacks. But you might be like, you're either irritable, you're in a bad mood, so you have disadvantage on all your mental checks, So, like, you're not fun to talk to, so your charisma's bad. You can't really think straight because you're like preoccupied with something else, and because you're preoccupied with something else, you're not as perceptive to the world around you or picking up on insight on people. The same thing on the other side is like, oh, you're just like sore and tired, like your body doesn't feel good, you're not as agile as you were because your dexterity's down, You don't feel as strong as you were because your muscles are really sore or whatever, and your constitution is just be like, maybe you didn't get good sleep or whatever it is. You just feel like tired and like worn down. So doing that kind of stuff. Then you set your watches, as is normal, and you attempt your long rest, and that's it when you're ending your travel day. And then when you go into resting, uh, you're currently running the Isle of Dread and contemplating how to run water and food foraging using the AD&D system. Ooh, yeah. You know what? I have not run Isle of Dread. I don't think I've even played Isle of Dread. I know of it. I don't think I have played it. Maybe a super modified version of it. If so, the thing that I'm thinking of, we did not play it very long. I think that game fell apart. But yeah, I mean, like I use the resource die mechanic just because I like it. Uh, it's also easier on everybody's bookkeeping instead of like keeping track of individual days of rations or whatever to just have a die. And it's like, oh, it's the end of the day. I need to roll my supply die. Everybody rolls it and then just moves on from that. It's like a 2-second thing. But yeah, how to run food and water and food foraging. Isle of Dread feels like an ADHD, ADHD, ADND module that probably has poison water in it. There's a lot of OSR stuff that has a lot of poison water stuff, like bad water that you might drink from. So I don't know too much about that, and or the food foraging aspect. So I'm sure that there's probably plenty of food to forage in that module. I would think. All right, resting. You roll one encounter per PC. Makes it easy. Hey, bigger party, more likely to get attacked. Smaller party, less likely to get attacked. Just how it goes. This also can mean, if you're rolling this, you have a party of 4, that also means you can have multiple encounters in the evening, at night. While that's unlikely to happen, I think that that's only happened to me like twice. But you can. You can also just as a DM decide to maybe like hand wave it if they really got their butts kicked. You can just be like, yeah, we're not gonna worry about that next one because I'm not trying to do a TPK here. I'm not trying to kill the whole party. But some players are like, oh, we only they have that one encounter and then they go Nova, and you're like, oh well, you guys went Nova and that was a really dumb thing to do. So yeah, there's definitely going to be another encounter that's probably going to be a lot tougher for you because you used all your resources thinking you were only going to have one fight in the day. And after you complete your rest, you go back to your morning travel prep. Now, the last part in here is camp days. This is one of the things that I'll probably look at bringing up. And you can rest in camp, and you can attempt to take a full day of rest in camp will remove a level of exhaustion from you that goes beyond whatever you did for your long rest. Now, those resting creatures cannot engage in any sort of usual downtime activities. They're on bed rest for the most part. Can't do anything strenuous. They can't do that. They can't go like foraging for food or do any of that kind of stuff. They have to pretty much just like hang around the camp. They can sit around the campfire or sleep, and that's about it. They can read a book if they want to do probably something like that. Like I'd probably let them do that or like, uh, but nothing. Nah, I was like, I would let them like maybe try to learn a language, but no, that's definitely a downtime activity. So no, I wouldn't let them get away with that. And so the creatures can enjoy benefits of a rest day by staying in a safe haven, which means like staying in town in an inn, staying in camp, taking that camp day, or they can rest in a traveling vehicle or litter. Like we said, it's useful to have a wagon. If you can just chuck the wizard in the back of the wagon and be like, hey, you just lay in the wagon all day while we walk. It's fine. And so that you can get back that extra level of exhaustion you might have. Because remember that everybody is rolling saves against that exhaustion levels at different times, different amounts. They might have a different amount of times that they have to roll for it depending on what their score is, whatever their initial score was. It also gives you a reason for why you might want a vehicle, because then you can keep moving. You don't have to wait in camp because you can't move. Because if that person moves at all, they're going to end up probably taking more levels of exhaustion. So it kind of gives you that idea. And then I had some additional topics, and this is from the first time we went over this stuff. Supply die and talking more about that. Search areas or hitting the box. Probably add some more stuff about that. Our node-based overland travel. So hex crawling is for hex crawling. That means if you are trying to go from hex to hex, looking for things within those hex. If you're just trying to get from point A to point B and you know where point A is and you know where point B is, that's an overland travel aspect. That's not a hex crawl thing. That's where you're like, we're going to walk along the road, or we're going to ride horses, or we're going to take a ship or something like that. I treat that differently than hex crawling. Hex crawling is more about the exploration, discovery aspect. It means that you're basically getting off the roads and you're getting into the rough, into like the rough and tumble like wilderness and area. You're like cutting your way, you're blazing your own path, so to speak. You are trailblazing. So that's very different than being like, I'm just walking from town A to village B. If that's the case, I use an overland travel system and be like, okay, I think there's maybe 3 nodes here. Here's 3 things that might happen along that trail. Or if that's not important, depending on the kind of game I'm running, I might be like, I actually just want them to get to the thing, and I'll just be like, get out there. Like, just go do that. Just get there. Because the actual travel aspect of something like that's not important. Like, that's not what we're trying to focus on. And then urban crawls. Urban crawls are a little bit different. Urban crawls are like when you're in a city and you're trying to find stuff within the city. Slightly different. Has a somewhat different system from this because cities are a lot smaller. That's more about just finding stuff. But you would have the same sort of like hex operations. You move from one place to another place to another place, moving throughout the city. Because generally you would be doing those an urban crawl in a major city, going from point A to point B to point C, and searching for things within that if you're looking for something very specific, whether that's like the entrance to the forgotten catacombs that are beneath the city, or trying to track down a member of the elusive thieves guild. You guys are going through that and doing that searching aspect of it. Trying to find the entrance to the black market or whatever. All right, so one of the first things I want to do is I want to reorganize some of this content because I'll actually get into here because this has no business being up here at the top. That should be down. Really, this should be like, okay, be down here with this stuff. Yeah, it should be down here with like the entering a new hex. That should be down there. So we need to reorganize a few different things. That's one of the things that we for sure want to reorganize. There's other stuff that I would probably end up pulling into this. And as we do more of our solo DnD thing, which we do on Saturday, so if you want to check out the stream, we're doing a river apart. We're coming up on what, like session 15, I think? As Gertrude and Kristoff hurry their way towards Druid Marks to try to get Reed resurrected. Our main character PC is fully just dead, and they are busy trying to get him resurrected. But we're going to be picking up because he's going to be talking to the Judger of Fate there. I'm still percolating on what exactly the Judger of Fate might want from Reed in exchange for coming back to life. Not sure yet, or trying to figure out whether maybe he's going to go to the good place afterlife, or maybe the not so good place afterlife. I can't imagine that he'll probably go to the bad place life. He hasn't been alive long enough for that to make a lot of sense. And he hasn't done anything that I think is too deplorable, especially comparatively. All right. So I think the easiest thing is here. Here's our camps, our trip to. Yeah. Depends on how I want to set it up. I could set it up with the thing that we're going to look at most is going to be on that front page. Or I could set it up with, hey, at the start of every day, which would be kind of how it is now, do that morning travel prep. Then you move into your hex crawl action. Then you enter the new hex. So I'm not I don't hate this. But yeah, the setup. So I think I might stick with that. I should probably add some information about the weather hexes, the weather hex flower. But that's kind of its own thing. It would be really weird to add that in here because it's got a full different kind of setup, and it's also like 2 pages. So it's really, I guess it's only 1 page, isn't it? It would be kind of a weird thing for me. I can't remember off the top of my head. Be kind of a weird addition in here. I might just add what those DCs need to be, what the adjustments might be. And of course, our weather is basically kind of comes into 3 different things. That's going to be temperature, and that's going to be precipitation, and it's going to be. So weather doesn't really need a change because 5e uses a different system for weather, which I'm not sure. I think maybe it just has a standard DC. But I can't remember off the top of my head. Let's see, D&D 5.5, cold weather. Environmental effects, extreme cold, when the temperature blocks freezing. Alright. I'm probably okay with this. I don't think that there's a. Yeah, this is about gear. Let's just con save. Uh, so you get not a success if you have the appropriate gear. I'm fine with that. Whether it's too high or too. We're in here extreme. Heat or cold. Con save DC 10. I guess I'll put that. Each hex crawl action. Rather than an hour, I'll just do it that way. Because again, I don't, because of the system. One of the reasons I like doing this system is that I'm not actually tracking hours in a day. The players will determine, their PCs will determine when they need to take a rest, when the end of the day will be, essentially. So I don't need to worry about what day or time it is, especially in a standard D&D game where everybody basically gets up in the morning when the sun comes up and is going to be stopping in at camp at roughly sunset or a little bit before sunset, ideally. So I don't really need to care that much about what actual time of day it is. And I really don't want to, if we're doing standard hex crawling, really make people roll these saves like 10 times in between doing all the other hex crawl stuff. That's not important. So each hex crawl action, they'll make that con save. Precipitation. And primarily, see, most of these things already have an effect. So light, precip gives you disadvantage. Perception. And heavy perception. Yep. Uh, as if blinded. Which I think, I can't remember if it gives you, I think you auto fail site based. I would also at this point probably say that edge on hearing based perception. And while these seem really not great, especially as you're hex crawling, you do want to also be cognizant that, hey, if you're trying to sneak around, these are good things to you because they apply to everybody. So if you are trying to get around, maybe you're in some sort of like hostile, like hobgoblin territory. I don't know. I like hobgoblins, so I often pull them as the example. I like them better than orcs. You're in hobgoblin territory, and you know they're in the area, and you're trying to sneak past them. Then these are all good effects for you because they also affect the hobgoblins. Means they're actually pretty easy to sneak past, which is good. And then wind. I don't know if like wind. I believe this provides cover. It's ranged attacks. I think it's 3/4 cover. I remember. I guess I've already got it up. Strong wind. Disadvantage on ranged weapon. Okay, it's just okay. They range attacks. Advantage. And you have disadvantage. Copy this. So I think we'd be here. I say as if deafened, as if deadened, deafened. It's also very difficult into extreme winds, but I don't know if we need. And then I don't think that we can just be like, there's not really anything for. I'll go with that. That's high or heavy winds, and then extreme winds. And these are gonna be like storm category of winds. So to put that in like real world terms, since I'm American, it's we're talking like I forget what the category is. It's either 60 or 70 mile an hour winds or greater, which if you've never been into, is not fun. It is the sort of stuff that will, if you're not paying attention, will blow you off your feet. So if we want to look at it that way, these would adjust our DC. This is the part where I'm getting into, and maybe we should just make some scratch pad down here. Where do I'll make it up here. So what are the actual? It's important to know the dials we can actually turn. One of them is the daily DC. We'll say the effort DC. The effort DC. So that's when this is our dials. Dials, if you don't understand that nomenclature, that is the things that we can turn up and down as ways to make things easier or more difficult. Now, unfortunately, most of the time, when it comes to hex crawling, and I do think that this is a negative in hex crawling's overall box, a con to the system, and not just the system, all hex crawl systems, is that things generally just get worse for you. And there's not really a lot of things that make things better or easier to hex crawl. And we do have some, but those are usually things that players have to bring to the table. There's no like situational things that generally make that easier. But having mounts and vehicles and stuff like that makes that stuff easier. So we've got the effort DC. We can do our plus 1d4 pace, just that, and con saves. And the last thing that we could probably adjust if we wanted to, but it definitely would not be one of the first things I would look at kind of changing, would be ability long rest. And I'll just make that more clear. Ability to complete a long rest. That would be, we would have to, I would try to not do that. And that's outside of being very annoying for players, not being able to complete a long rest, it can get you, if you want to figure out a way to make D&D pretty dangerous pretty quickly, take away, especially new, like contemporary D&D, if you take away the ability to take a long rest, which is one of the easiest ways to take a dial and really ratchet it up on the difficulty or tension, is to be like, oh, you can't take a long rest. And that impacts certain classes much worse than other classes. So if you're playing a fighter or a warlock and you are playing one of the classes that gets a bunch of stuff back on short rest, you can deal with that a lot easier, especially if you're somebody like a fighter where you get things like second wind back. So your ability to heal yourself and not have to rely on hit dice in a different way helps a lot. If you are, maybe like a cleric or wizard's not a great example. Let's go with sorcerer. Sorcerer, hey, you only got so many spells in a day, and most of your stuff is based off of a long rest. So if they don't let you, your DM puts you in a situation where you can't take a long rest, that unequally impacts you more, because most of your stuff is based off of a long rest. And I took wizard out of that category because wizards are affected by that, but they also get the ability to do arcane recovery, which means that they have the ability to get at least some spell slots back on a short rest, which is extremely useful. It's really just them and warlocks who are able to recuperate any amount of spells on a short rest. I don't think it. Not off the top of my head. Certainly not the ranger I'm running. And since I play with a barbarian and a warlock, they are down for short rests, and rangers like it. I don't really get anything out of a short rest. Sure, we can take a short rest. So honestly, the barbarian doesn't really get that much out of a short rest. I think their rages are per day, because we're not to the level where they just get back rages on a short rest or on the complete. Okay, so those are kind of the dials that we can mess with. Other things we could put in here would be like also put in here like alternatives. Alternatives to, because exhaustion is the big thing. That's how the system works. It uses those 2014 exhaustion rules. It really focuses on them. That's the main D&D 5e mechanic that we focused on when we. So these are the things that we could do. There are other ways that we could do. We could force them to take hit point damage, or hit die damage. Be like HP hit dice. Um, it's really hard to be like they could lose some other sort of manageable resource because every class has different stuff at that point. So you really want stuff that every class is going to have access to. So their hit points or the hit dice or uh, supplies. That's a good one. Some ways it'd be like, oh, you can be an option to be like, oh, you can instead of taking exhaustion because of this thing, uh, you can instead, when it becomes time to roll for your resource die, be like, you just are way hungrier than you were expecting. And so you won't take the level of exhaustion, but you will have to roll with disadvantage when you do your resource die roll. It's probably going to be a d6 or a d4. And then you have to take the lowest result. So if you roll a 1, which means it's more likely you're going to roll a 1 and you're going to burn through your limited resources and some in the way of like rations. And that also puts you in a very difficult position. Stop and have a camp day or forage or something else. So those are some things that we can kind of tweak as we go on. So at this point, I think we're at a good point. We're going to really start messing around here with stuff. I like this stuff. This getting weather into the stuff is probably going to be a longer process. So I think we're going to leave that where it is. So we're going to leave those notes as it is for me right now. We'll get down to setting travel paces and changing up that stuff. But before I do that, I am going to take a short break and refill the old cup of coffee. So you guys hang out here for a minute. I'll be right back and we will start futzing around a little bit more. All right. You guys have any questions? Feel free to drop them down in the chat. All right, I'm back. Oh man, we're deep into the Fog Weaver now. The playlist. Ugh, good stuff. One of my favorite dungeon synth artists. Good stuff. Really enjoy it. Very atmospheric. So good. All right, let's go back in. All right, so we said we're gonna leave weather for right now because I don't know where that's gonna drop in because weather already has enough kind of stuff going on. Like precip should probably be the primary thing as far as travel's concerned. Uh, wind, like wind howling, but hmm, I don't know. I think precip will. So I think precip should probably do something. Or okay. Just like extreme heat and cold should do something, but it's kind of assumed that you're going to be adventuring in those environments already, and they already have mechanics for it, or else you take exhaustion. I probably should put it here. That's already kind of pushed. That's already in this guy right here. All right, setting our travel paces. Okay, so this is something I've changed. So it's just like set effort. We're gonna be like reset per PC. We should effort DCs. So when I first brought this, I thought that they would make a saving throw. But the problem is that I realized really quickly once I started running it at the table is that for every time that somebody rolled really, really well on Constitution saving throws, somebody would roll real bad. And you don't get a lot of hex crawling done when somebody rolls like a 2 on the die and they have a DC of like 5 and their bonus to con saves is like +1. So they start failing stuff pretty quickly, especially if they've got that bad dice look. So what I end up do is just do take 10 or passive con save. Very easy. And we can apply advantage or disadvantage. We'll just do plus or minus 5 because that's what you do with that. For adjustments. So again, certainly need to know what that is. And then we go to begin the day. We choose our hex crawl action. Because there can be points from which you might need to rest in the hex you're in, and you might start that day by searching the hex. So that's one of the reasons that you do that. So you're not always going to be traveling to a new hex. Most of the time, you're going to be traveling to a new hex when you start off the day, but not always. And I think those are all standard. I don't think we're going to have anything changed there. I'm trying to think if it's something else that might come up, but those are kind of the big three. Just started your day, you're either going to be looking in the current hex, you're going to be moving to another hex, or you're going to end your travel day. Now, you might exit hex crawling, let's say if you, in traveling to a new hex, you come across a road, and you're getting to the road and then going to use overland travel to somewhere else, you might end hex crawling right there. But those are what I would say kind of like the uncommon occurrences. Maybe we'll just do this on here. Yeah, I guess because that would be no different than arriving at your destination. So I guess I don't really there. This originally was a D6 pace, but I had already changed it at that point. Actually, I might have actually changed this after I had already made this. They're going to apply any situational advantages or disadvantages. So yes, this is one of the things that we have not considered. Okay, so those are our dials, and then we have things that the things impact hex crawling. I think right now we've got our weather is our first thing. Go down here. Now we've got terrain. Pace. Again, unlike other systems where I'm not really concerned about pace, there is an importance of pace as to whether you're trying to be potentially like slow and cautious. But in here will be like cautious, standard, or hurried. You know what? That's another thing we can roll for. That's actually another dial for us. And this is actually really important. So one of the other things we can do, so in addition to ability to complete a long rest, would be what are the other things that you're doing in hex crawling that could also be impacted by that? I'm dumb. Why was I not thinking about this? Uh, Random encounter chances. If you want to be cautious because you're actively avoiding that, you could do that. Encountering, discovering points of interest. I think those will work. So if you're going through the wilderness, you're doing your wilderness exploration. You're like, we're trying to be cautious, and I'm going to use cautious instead of stealthy, because we're not going to make stealth rolls for this. We're just going to be like, everybody's trying to be cautious. So we're trying to avoid any ambushes. We're trying to watch out for. There we go. Yes. We're going to try to avoid any ambushes. We're trying to avoid any sort of random encounter. So I'm like, okay, you're going to go slower, which I think is going to mean that I'd probably bump up the pace. So I'm probably going to roll higher on the pace because you're going to get less done. So that would be probably change that. Because these are all going to be, because it is a pace effect, it is all going to affect primarily this. With some sort of pro or con. Cautious being like, you're not gonna be able to go as far, so that pace will be an advantage, but you're also going to have advantage on any D12 random encounter checks. And also maybe like points of interest. Because I would also assume that if you're being cautious, you might also be more likely to find a point of interest in it. Maybe. I would assume that would be one of the reasons, because if you're hurrying, I think you're less likely to come across a point of interest. You're not looking for it. In the same way, if you're hurrying, you're more likely to run into a random encounter. But the advantage to that is that you'll have disadvantage on this pace check. So you'll roll 2d4 and take the lowest. So you can go a lot further in the day. But the trade-off is that. So I think those all make sense. All right. One of the things that are going to attack this would be like here. Spells. Spells is going to be a hard one because spells have their own stuff going on, but that is something that could impact it. But luckily, most spells will tell us specifically what kind of impact they're going to have. And should I need to adjudicate that as a dungeon master, I'll just do that. I don't need to mess around with it. Hey, how's it going? putting things back together. So I think under gear, we would also put. It feels weird to put this under here, but we're gonna put beasts, hirelings, and vehicles. I think those all fall under gear aspects for like things that you have as a party that's going to help you do this better. I think those all fit in pretty well. Then yeah, any sort of effects, situational. You know, I should probably just do this situation. Well, that's not really a situational, is it? And we've already got terrain in there. Great. That's true. If PCs are pushing, I have done that before, forcing them to just start rolling off con saves from the beginning. So that's another dial that we have. We can put this under here because those are technically two things. So advantage versus disadvantage. Active versus passive. Because the way that the system generally works right now is that you automatically pass it until you hit whatever your passive con save is, and then you have to start making active ones. So that way you're not failing stuff right off the bat. So, you know, I try to mix it up that way. So that way, because like I said, just like with having them roll the pace setting at the beginning of the day is like for everybody who rolls a 20, there's somebody who rolls a 1, and having like a 2 as your DC, not great. But having one and being like, oh, but you need to actively make works on it because, and maybe that works a little bit better with hurry pacing. Maybe. These are things that I'm going to have to noodle about, and there's not going to be probably super easy 1-to-1. And I'm really going to have to sit down and noodle on this stuff a little bit and probably move a whole bunch of jigsaw pieces back and forth, a bunch of Legos around. I'll have to scramble them around before I find something that I'm going to be relatively happy with. Thus is the nature of whatever you would call my design process, which is just a mad sprint most of the time. And trying to wrench order out of chaos. Okay, so I think these are good. So I think that I would just, so I don't understand what I'm meaning by that, but I mean pushing, because I'll understand what pushing means. Oh, you're working on a character at the moment. Not a D&D character, but one I wish I could adapt. But I don't think it would work. Oh, what system are you playing with? Playing a different system, I guess. Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of characters that don't translate very well to D&D, depending on whatever system you're using. And vice versa. I gave up that idea a long time ago. I just don't think that they work very well at doing that. Trying to translate characters across systems is not super easy. I do know that there's like, I think it's Dungeon World that talks about like how you can translate a D&D character to Dungeon World, and I'm like, not really. You can't really do that. They're not at all the same. And Savage Worlds can kind of be like that too, and I'm like, you can't really do that. Savage Worlds don't. Your mouth is writing checks. Your system cannot cash. More in terms of the character, lore wise, it wouldn't work. Okay. I mean, the lore of D&D can be whatever you want it to be. That's one of the strengths of it, is that it can kind of be whatever you want it to be. Unless you're playing it in a very specific, if you're playing in like Faerun in the Forgotten Realms or something like that, you're going to have to probably accommodate some of the Forgotten Realms stuff. Unless you're playing with a Dungeon Master, Game Masters, who's like, it's cool, you can just be like multiverse pulled in from a different area. You can get isekai'd into the Forgotten Realms, I don't care. Some Dungeon Masters are like that. A lot aren't, though. A lot are like, no, that sounds like it's gonna be a pain in the butt, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to deal with that. Which understandable. I am absolutely a DM. I'm a DM who's usually like, you can play just about whatever you want. I don't really care that much. But also know that whatever you choose to play, the world will have some sort of reaction to that. So if you want to play a very specific character and I tell you, hey, letting you know like that sort of character is not going to be super common here and people aren't going to know what to do with this or they're going to react really poorly to it. I'm just letting you know you can play it if you want, but I just don't want you to get upset when the world kind of pushes back at you if you decide to play it. They're going to have issues with it. Like one of my current players decided that they wanted to play an elf in my world, which is great. I love it. I love elves. There are lots of elves in my setting, but there is a very specific societal thing that happens with elves in my setting, which is that just because I try to add like something that's a little different for each kind of ancestry, so they're each a little bit different. And one of the things that happens with elves in particular is that other ancestries have face blindness to them, so they can't really tell elves apart. They're just like, I don't know, pretty people kind of look like pretty people. And so elves in most societal, like in most places, need to have some sort of like identifying mark, like a tattoo or a very specific piece of jewelry or something that kind of something that's not, their features that identifies who they are because other people can't tell them apart. And when you start thinking about the implications of that and being like, no, people really literally cannot tell you apart. So if you came back and said that you bought something from a shop 2 days ago, they'd be like, I mean, an elf bought something from me 2 days ago, but I have no clue whether you are that person or not by looking at you." Very, very interesting, very different. Oh, your character is when heir to the family of knights who practice pacifism. Ooh. Uh, always always difficult to pull off the old pacifism in especially a D&D campaign. Tough. Not impossible, but tough. Very tough. That said, pacifism is a form of penance for the actions of a rather brutal ancestor. Oh, generational trauma. Gotcha. Cool. No, I like that. But he has since had to renounce his oath. Hey, that seems normal. That seems like how that would go. All right. Search call actions. We got through those. I think. Our pace. We got through that. Entering a new hex. So when we enter the new hex, we need to know what kind of biome it is. So we got that. I think probably the easiest thing. I guess is when you search the new hex, use a hex crawl action, search the current hex, you travel to a new hex in the day. Yeah, because this technically needs to be moved in front of search current hex, travel to new hex, because those operations would not necessarily happen if you're going to end your travel day. So this technically. That way, I'm trying to lay it out so it's a little bit more of a practical guide, assuming that somebody was using this and not like me who knows it very much by heart, but by somebody who might be looking at it for the first time, trying to figure out, well, you don't roll for an extra d4 if you're ending the day. That thing actually needs to go under here. So you're entering a new hex. First thing you're going to do is roll for that. And you know what? That's not necessarily true. I'd probably roll for this first. Then I do this. Then I do the encounter roll. Then I do the point of interest occurrence. All right. Some sort of wandering monster, some sort of wilderness dressing. 0-1. Easy enough. And then search for your point of interest occurrence. We're going to apply situation modifiers because we might be changing that. and leave this line in. I can always come back and take it out again later, but that way I don't forget to put it in. Searching your current hex, 1d6 point of interest currents. So this is sort of like the stumble upon. And then we get our point of interest stuff. Blah 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 blah. Camp day. That was moved to a new hex. That was search a hex. So this actually needs to be upgraded. That's heading 3. So if you decide to search the current hex, you still have to do pace, and you still have to do the encounter roll. But you don't have to do the stumble upon point of interest because you are actively looking for it. Excellent. Um, then we'll see if when you want to change any of the stuff that's happening with our all the theme stuff. I'm pretty much okay with. This is not really changed at all in the way that I run things. You're either rolling 1d12. This one things if you have not seen me do this stuff before, you haven't watched any of the hex mapping, which I also use the same sort of system for points of interest. Uh, in the Heartlands, there's a chance that you will be rolling a d12 instead of a d20. And when we look down here, because these types will show up more often in kind of the Heartlands or more civilized areas. You're more likely to run across settlements. You're more likely to come across holdings, which is like keeps and castles and that kind of stuff. Some sort of religious sites like temples, that nature. More likely to run across travel havens, which will be like our inns for the most part. More likely to run across like bridges and ferries and other sort of mountain passes, uh, p- ways people travel because there's a lot more roads and things of that nature. You're more likely to, yes, run across monster layers because monster layers, if you look back up at our themes here, those include just like humanoid places or graveyards or uh, places where giants live or the mountains where dragons are. But most of the stuff, because there's a lot more artificial stuff, there'll be a lot more of those guys down there. So yes, more likely to have monster layers because monster layers could also just be a guide that's bad. Meeting places, which is areas where people come together to meet. More likely to have isolated homesteads, so people who have like a farm dead off by themselves. More likely to find informative signage, tells you where things are and warns you about different stuff. Oh, this has actually changed, hasn't it? This is before I changed this because I have informative signage and omens and warnings together. This has somewhat changed. We should fix that. I'm gonna throw you back over to me so I can go pull up that actual. We will adjust that. That's how old that is. From again, it's from almost 3 years ago. There are going to be some changes. You're talking about your character who's renounced his oath. Yeah, siblings each have inherited an aspect of their. Oh, all right. So it's very much literal. Sister inherited her strength. His brother inherited the cunning. Character inherited her joy of battle. But for him, it's not bloodshed or slaying. It's just the pure joy while he's fighting. It's the love of the game, the joy of dance. Dance is life. Murder is life. Murder is fun. All right. Any my Hex Crawl operations. Amendment. All right. Okay. All right. Got I could have done it, but it's just easier to just do it this way. Okay, good. Bada bing, bada boom, and you know what? There's no need to. But one of the things I will do is I will add a little break line in here. Makes it easy. All right, here. Let me throw it back over. There you go. You can see it. So what changed? I put all the signage together. This is one of the changes I made years ago. I feel like at this point, I made the signage kind of go all together. So information signage, omens, and warning signs. It's all just signage. And to do that, I got roll twice and combine results. Ignore duplicates. So if we rolled a 12 on our d12, instead we'd be like, okay, cool, I need to roll 2d12 now. Let's say I rolled a 8 and a 4. All right, which would mean there's an isolated homestead and a travel haven. So there's going to be those are two weird ones that kind of go together, but that's okay. So the travel haven will be run by some sort of like hermit kind of thing, which will be very interesting. So it's very much like off the beaten path kind of place, but is a place where you can get like respite and succor and get that kind of stuff there. But will be run by like this very like isolated person. It's got a very sort of like Bates Motel kind of vibe to it, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Also, kind of not a lot of people around. Kind of feels a little weird. That's the kind of vibe we're gonna get from something like that. And then other open thing. All right, camping. The end of the day, we're gonna set camp. We're gonna roll our supply dice for our characters. We're gonna go put this down here. There's a chance somebody's reading it and might not know what that is, so that could be. I don't want to do this. 0, 1, 4, 6, 8, 1d10. I get to. 1d12 is highest up I go. Like, I could make an argument for 1d20. I'm not going to though. If you are not familiar with the supply dice, I mean we kind of talked about it already, I guess. It's just the way that I like to keep track of things like rations and stuff like that in a much easier, you know what? There. Spaces. The way to keep track of resources that's a little bit more ambiguous, gives you an ability to roll a die, and I think that rolling dice is fun. I'd rather do that than mark ticks on a character sheet. So gives you some ambiguity. It's also a fun, nice, easy thing to do. Easy thing to implement and run with. Usually you can only carry up to a d6 on your back. A d8 requires some sort of animal or beast of burden with you, or some other way to carry extra supplies. D10 requires some sort of vehicle. So it's going to require a boat or a wagon, some type, or I guess a cart. And then a D12 will go up to like ships and but a D6 is all you can carry on your back for any type of supply. So I use this primarily for rations, but I also use it for things like arrows you might want to keep track of. Now I know that a lot of people don't keep track of arrows and rations in games, but you should. And it's a limited resource, and D&D at its core is a resource management game. Sure, it's about lots of people want to use it as a way to do collaborative storytelling, but the game aspect of it is about resource management game. It's just a resource management game with a lot of flavor to it. But at the end of the day, it is a resource management game. So if you are not playing a game in which you are managing resources, the game feels very wonky. It does not feel. This is where you get into the areas where people are like, "Oh, I don't ever feel like I can challenge my players." That's probably why. Probably because you're not viewing it through the lens of a resource management game. Once you turn that little part of your brain on about it, change the way that you think about the game is that way, both as a player and as a DM, but primarily as a DM. Life gets real easier for you, or much easier for you. Once you figure out, oh, actually, challenging players is actually quite easy most of the time. About resource denial and expenditure. You tap our option of morale boosting action. So previously, I still like this. I like the skill DC being the day's final pace. I like that. I still like that. I think that works really well. So, which feels like I think that's true. I think that has that sort of Ludo narrative resonance that we want. I know I'm using the big words. That gameplay, the gameplay feels like the narrative's supposed to feel. So if you spend a long day just getting your butts kicked back and forth across the backwoods, and you roll into camp at like DC 18, everybody's got like 2 levels of exhaustion. Nobody's in there trying to do morale boosting activities. Everybody's like, no, I'm going to bed. That's what I'm doing. I am dog tired. So that's what they're doing. And I feel like, yeah, that makes sense that most people, when the DC is high, people aren't going to want to try to attempt it most of the time. Especially after that first level of exhaustion, because remember that they will be trying to make that. These are going to be checks, not saves. So that means that people are going to probably be likely to check this at least one or more members of the party. At least the way that I've run it, this is generally how this ends up, is that most of the time the party will not stop to rest until one person at least fails their constitution saving throw and gets the first level of exhaustion. It will basically keep going till at least one person gets exhausted, which I'm fine with. I think that's a really good benchmark. The problem is like once one person gets that level of exhaustion, you really don't want them to get 2 levels of exhaustion because then their pace is halved. So then they kind of like auto go into cautious pace. And that means that the DC is going to ramp up a lot more because they're not going to get very far. So if that's the case, they're going to get into it. But it also means that they have disadvantage on all their ability checks. So if they're trying to get to the end of the day and then trying to do these morale boosting activities, which are all going to be like skill and tool proficiency checks, if you get into that aspect and trying to do that, if you get a high DC and you have a level of exhaustion, now you're trying to hit a DC 18 with disadvantage. At a thing you might be okay at doing. I mean, unless you're like the bard and you just got insane performance, there's really no reason the bard shouldn't be doing a campfire sing along every night, even if he's the only one who's singing and everybody else is asleep. But there's no reason he shouldn't be doing it. Because he's going to have, even at low levels, just an insane bonus to it. But I like that. I think those play well together. When this was originally done, it was all PCs must participate. I don't think that I'm going with that anymore. I think so I think I'm gonna remove this part. I don't think I'm gonna be like so all PCs must confirm they are participating for rolling. So if you have the bard PC and the player who's doing the bard is like, oh yeah, no, I'm definitely gonna do a performance check, and then immediately rolls before everybody else has decided what they're gonna do. Doesn't matter what that bard rolled, we're gonna throw that away. That roll does not count until we don't do the rolling until everybody's confirmed, because the success is going to depend if more than half pass, applies boon, next day space, This is one of the things that's going to do this. So let's go ahead and add that up here to one of our things that is going to impact things. Good, because this is one of the things that's going to do this. This is going to be our morale boosting actions. This is good because we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 potential things, dials that we could do, and 6 different things that could impact it, at least split up. So one of the things we might do is we might do split out animals and gear if we want to affect all of these things. Which I might do. I don't know yet. No. Things are very up in the air. I'm trying to keep an open mind as we go through this and stop like locking things down as I'm going. And if more than half fail, lies Bane. And we could use this as literal boon and bane. Technically bless and bane. That would be a fun, easy way to add that. So instead of giving them advantage, which was generally how I was kind of posing that, but to just give them a plus or minus 1d4, which I think I might like better. I'm not sure. Because it's going to depend a lot about which dial I decide to tweak with this. Because it would be cool to just be like, and you get to add an extra d4 just the day's effort DC. That's pretty cool. So it might just be a 1, but it could be a 4. There are other things that are already going to probably give bonus to that. So I don't dig that. It means that like morale's useful, but it's not going to kill you either way to do it. It really is just kind of like an optional thing. Too. It's not super powerful. This also has it built in, so it's like if it's equal, pass and fail. Change. It's good because I like this because it gives you a lot of RP flavor because we don't often focus a lot about like the camp aspect of D&D. Like, what do the characters do in camp? We're just like, and then we go to bed, and then we get up, and either there's a fight in the night or there's not a fight in the night, and we get up in the morning and we continue on. This is like, oh no, you tell me about like the things you guys are doing in camp. I've also got up there on the shelf. I'm not gonna pull it down. These campfire cards, which are like, oh, here's a question that you ask about like the PCs in character and about like conversation that you guys have while you're at the campfire. So you a moment to like RP and learn a little bit more about like each of the characters in that faction. So give them an ability, a platform to like talk amongst themselves. Which is a super great thing to do, super great trick if you're a dungeon master and you like need some extra time at the table and you can just be like, okay, as you guys it's also useful like while they're walking on if you're doing hex crawling or overland travel or something like that, and you need to look something up or you need a few minutes to like figure out some improv things instead of just like calling a break. Calling a break's fine too. And nothing wrong with that. Call breaks. They're good. You can just pull out like a talking topic like that and be like, "Oh, what are you guys talking about?" Like as you're walking. Because remember that these guys are probably all walking together and talking to each other for like hours upon hours each day as they're moving through the world. You guys aren't doing that in silence. What the heck are you guys talking about? How are you guys entertaining yourselves? As somebody, like I said, again, sometimes these scrolling and D&D stuff in general is it sometimes feels very clearly like it's not created by somebody who has a lot of outdoors experience because somebody who's done plenty of backpacking and things like that in their life be like, yeah, you're going to talk a lot. You're kind of really bored most of the time. You can only bask in nature for so long. At some point, it's just like you're just putting a step in one foot in front of the other, and you're just desperate for anything to think about other than just walking. So giving them an opportunity or a prompt for what they're talking about then gives you plenty of minutes to like flip through books and scribble notes down or look stuff up or whatever it is. Build that next encounter, roll for stuff. One of the things that I wish talked about like these systems, like the standard hex crawling systems where it's just like the DM doing the work like 90% of the time and the player's just kind of waiting for that game to happen. A lot of these would really benefit for something like that. Just be like, okay, you guys are walking along. What are you guys talking about? Or here's a prompt about something that you guys talk about comes up as a conversation topic as you guys are walking along. RP that out while I make rolls on these charts and stuff. Just anything to like make the game feel like it's not just one person playing the game most of the time. These will work. I like these. So we're getting rid of all PCs must participate because I found out that like some people just don't want to do it. Uh, Feels weird to me because I'm like all down for it, but some people don't want to do that stuff. This is an opportunity for people to feel like, oh, they can really also to get to use some of those proficiencies that oftentimes don't get used in D&D. If you're like, oh, I've got proficiency in weaving tools, great. What am I going to do with that? Like, well, maybe you could come up with something. Maybe you're like working on something while you're in camp. Even though, hey, I don't know how I feel about that. It's fine. I don't know how I feel about that. I'd have to think about that for a little. So I'm trying to come up with an aspect that's a very specific about like how would you use weaving? That I don't know, but there are a lot of proficiencies that would make sense. Like we talked about smithing or tinkering for like repairing stuff. Leatherworking also falls into that, like maintaining gear, like that. Animal handling could be like taking care of the animals if you have like horses or pack mules or something like that, taking care of them. Um, if you had something like insight, it might be like speaking with if you had hirelings, speaking with the hirelings or listening to another kind of like problems. I mean, trying to be that friendly ear for them and trying to keep everybody's spirits up. Of course, if you're the bard, you can do like performances or something like that. You do storytelling, etc. If you have those cooks utensils, you're going to be making, trying to make the best meal you can for people. Maybe I give you a little bonus if you've got some. You go out of your way to like get extra spices and stuff like that. I'll let you mix all that kind of stuff in. Um, I think of some others. Vehicle proficiency could also be like maintaining vehicles. I'd also count that for that, as well as if you had carpentry stuff like that, that would also that. So there's lots of options that you can like pull some of that other stuff that's like in D&D but often doesn't get used. Camp, the end of travel day, like camp area is a thing to like consolidate all that stuff together. So I really want to keep this stuff. And then you set your watches, then you attempt your long rest, and then this idea for expedited exhaustion recovery. Because originally, the way that I had originally planned it, and this has been changed even from the original idea was that you wouldn't be able to heal from exhaustion with a long rest. I was going to like change that dial so it was a little bit more gritty. But I realized, depending on where you are, if you're like deep in the wilderness, there's really not going to be a lot of things. It also doesn't work really well if you need to hurry to some place. If the only way you can get rid of exhaustion is by spending a day of not traveling, it's not the greatest in the world. So having the ability to run, and then if you get a level of exhaustion, sleep off that. You always get back one level of exhaustion in an extended rest or a long rest. So it's really easy. That's why most parties that I have run using these rules will go until they get at least one level of exhaustion, and then sit down and do that. So I think these work. Um, Also do the wandering creature encounter, and those might not be applicable if you do the wilderness dressing. This is really good. Sometimes a lot of rolling for random encounters is a d6. I use a d12 usually because 12 when you're traveling is a wilderness dressing, which is I don't have it out, but I have a d20 table depending on what biome you're in as to things you might encounter. And sometimes it's just like, oh, it's a nice vista, or there's some travelers that you come across, or there might be some hunters or trappers, or you come across some like local fauna, or um I don't know. You find some berry bushes or something like that, or you could stop and maybe try to attempt to supplement some of your rations. Stuff like that. Really easy kind of stuff that you might run into that most of the time is not a combat. And most of the time is not an encounter with a creature, but occasionally is, and even occasionally might be a combat with a creature, depending on what happens in that encounter. Whereas rolling a one is often means, hey, you're probably gonna get in a fight with this thing. Not always, but most likely. More likely than not, will end up being a combat encounter. And I like that because it still ends up with a 1 in 6 chance that you're gonna come across something. But when you do things like rest, because the more people that are in your party, based off of this, the more roles you're going to have for that. And usually this is where I think I differ from a lot of dungeon masters, or I'm trying to differ from a lot of dungeon masters, is that I will often see a lot of dungeon masters be like, okay, you guys like bed down for rest and camp. And then, okay, you guys have set your watches. Who's going first? Who's going second, third, whatever. Like, oh, now it's your watch. Now roll a perception check for me. Like, now I only do that and be like, okay, we assume, first off, I just take your passive perception. I assume that you're on watch. So during that time period, you are alert and paying attention. Uh, so I will just make active stealth checks if people are trying to make stealth checks against you. But I'll just roll for the random. I'll just have them roll for the random encounter first, because otherwise, there's no point to rolling anything else. No point about like whether you're up or paying attention or anything. Just we're just gonna see if there's a random encounter that shows up while you're there or not. And then that means that there's really only a 1 in 12 chance that you're actually going to be attacked at camp, rather than a 1 in 6 chance, because most of the time, most of these dressings will not be important, will not be applicable to being in camp, because they're assuming that you're moving. So if it was like, oh, and you come across some berry bushes, like, well, you're not going to come across berry bushes because you're not moving. There might be some local fauna, right? You might see some deer come close to the campsite during the night. That's a real thing that could happen. And so you might be alerted to that and might check it out, only to discover that usually when I would do that, I'll just have them get spooked by deer, because deer are going to flush out of the undergrowth while they are poking around trying to figure out what the hell's out there. Or they wake up the entire group only to find out that it's a bunch of deer. And then usually they're not happy with the person who's on watch. Just a light little bit of levity, just be like, oh, that was fun. Then everybody hunkers back down. But less likely that you'll do that, which I like, because we're gonna roll for it more often. So just trying to figure out, like, something like this tells you roll for a random encounter once during the day you're traveling and once in camp at night. I'm like, well, that's not very much. You're gonna be moving around for 10 hours, and there's only a one chance that you might see something. And that's also weird because there's a bunch of stuff in here. There's like a bunch of people and animals and stuff. It seems weird, and this is not a very large area, that you wouldn't run into stuff pretty regularly just traveling around. But yeah, different style. What we're going for. But it means that like less likely you're going to be doing more rolls, because you're going to have more PCs rolling. I like it because it also means that like the bigger the group is. So if you have a group of a D&D group that's got 7 players in it, that group is a lot more obvious and a lot more easier to target, because their camp is just bigger and makes more noise. those sorts of things. They're just more visible than a solo character. If you're playing a solo D&D, like we're doing on Saturday, I only need to make one encounter roll. Well, that's not true because I'm technically making them for the sidekicks, but that's a one-off. If we were playing with like a duet, nah, not a duet game, a duo game where there's only 2 PCs, we'd only roll for 2. So that duo is going to get attacked in camp way less than a party that's got 7 people in it. Those guys are going to get attacked much more frequently. But, they also have 7 PCs, so they're going to be able to deal with it a lot easier. All right. Camp day, you're going to remove exhaustion levels. So any changes I want to make to camp day, because I think everything with resting feels good. Oh right, this previously only had a maximum of 1 event, which is something I'm going to change. Yeah, I'm gonna leave that how it is because I think that some people will want more combat. And hex crawls, if you're a big combat-y kind of person, they can be a little boring. So having the opportunity that there can be multiples, I think it's fine. Also keep just a little tinge of fear in the back of the player's minds. Be like, hey, maybe don't Nova on this encounter because you don't know you're gonna after this encounter's over that you're gonna get through the night. We're gonna add this down here. I'm gonna put this on its own. No. I just put a little note down here. Um, be more like the additional random counter checks if the party's spent. That's for we're trying to avoid like. What we wanted to do is we want to make the wilderness and hex crawling feel somewhat dangerous. What we don't want is to accidentally end up killing a whole bunch of people. Because there could be, and we don't necessarily want it to take over the full session. Because there is, like we said, if you had a party with 7 people, there is, though it's a very rare occurrence, there is the possibility that every single one of those people on watch could roll a 1 and have a random encounter happen. And the party's now suddenly got to take on 7 encounters without a rest. Uh, Again, would be really uncommon. Most I could think of would probably be like maybe if you have that many PCs, maybe 3. Might be a not rare occurrence that you could have 3 happen overnight. And if that's the case, you might decide, maybe we're just gonna hand wave this one. Like after if you want to like take that vibe in as the table, you want to like mind meld with everybody at the table and be like, how are all the PCs looking? Are they really hurt? And I know this is the thing that I feel like I need to do all the time as Dungeon Master Game Master because I tend to run a little tougher of a game. You're like, hey, I got no problem kicking teeth out of my PCs in my games. So I am constantly like, if I throw another combat at you, will I start killing you? I don't want to do that. This is a random encounter. That's not really what I'm going for. But if you guys feel like you can handle it, or you guys are talking about how necessarily you haven't spent a lot of resources, maybe I'm going to let those ride. Maybe we're going to see if we're going to have 2 or 3 in a night. Sure, that might take up the meat of the session. Again, I use morale rules when I'm running encounters, so my encounters don't take nearly as long as a lot of other dungeon masters. I'm like, once people get hit for like 50% of their HP or 50% of the group's gone, they start making active checks to see if they're going to run from combat. So it is short, but it does get like spells off the table. Your PCs will use spells. They will take some hits. They will get some damage in them and have to deal with that. And then they'll be like, do I spend the hit die now? If I do that, I'm taking a short rest instead of a long rest, and then I have to take a long rest. The mechanics of it are a little blotchy, but interesting. Or they'll be like, I'm going to take a long rest. I'm not going to worry about healing this damage. Then they go to sleep, and then another encounter happens, and they come up and they only have like 60% of their health going into a new combat. That's not a great place to be. But it does give anytime that we're setting out meaningful choices in front of our players, then we're doing something right. So if they go through a combat in the middle of the night and they're like, man, I'm down to like 60% health. Like I could spend a hit die, but they might have to look at the sheet and be like, but if I spend the hit die now, I'm going to go over that threshold where I'm not going to get all my hit dice back at the end of a long rest. Because you only get up to half your level? Yeah, half your level rounded down. So if they were level, let's say 5, and they had already spent 2 hit dice throughout the day, for whatever reason, they're like, I could spend that third one and maybe get some hit points back, but at this point, once I finish that rest, I'm still going to have like one that's not going to come back. Do I want to do that? Is it worth the risk? Do I take that gamble or not? And once they start doing that like days at a time, if you're doing a lot of hex crawling over land, you can get into trouble real quick. It's like I said, it is a game about resource management. And so if you make your players have to manage those resources, they're going to have to start doing that. Before we finish out, I want to talk about some stuff that I'm going to add in here. That I want to add in. So we talked through all the things that were in here already, all the changes that I want to make to the existing stuff, some stuff that I do want to add in. So one of the things that I wanted to add in at the start of the day, which I think is morning trap prep, yeah. And I think I'm going to put it for begin the day. And that's going to be, we're going to double check. For heading. And then we're going to do like, I'll need to add some stuff in here because this is where stuff's going to get kind of noodly for the DM. There is going to be some upfront stuff that you're going to be. So they'll roll a wilderness survival check to determine like the heading for which direction they're going to move in. I'm not sure what that DC is going to be. It might just be their standard thing, and maybe they need to start rolling for it after. That's a lot of rolling then. Just per thing. You want hex crawl procedures to move pretty quickly. Like the actual moving from hex to hex would be pretty quick. So I'm not sure if I want to set the DC as to whatever their DC. Yeah, it'll have to be something else. Probably just a random DC. Might be affected by distance, probably not. So they're going to need to check for a heading. So assuming that they are traveling overland, they're trying to find something specific. They're not just like randomly combing the countryside for adventure. That would be a very old school Hex Crawl where you just start off in a village and you're like, go find adventure. Team's just like, I don't know, just go out there and do stuff. Okay. You'll find something. But this is more like, oh, you're looking for something specific. So this is like orienteering for yourself. You're orienting your position to know where you need to go to get to the thing that you're trying to find. So then we'll use like the grenade rolls. Use grenade rolls for fails. I was trying to think, does it really depend on like how far? The further away the PCs are from the thing that they are trying to reach, the more impactful those failures are. Right? There's a big difference between if you're 1 degree off course, if you're going 100 feet, or 100 miles. If you're 100 miles, 1 degree off course makes a big difference. If you're going 100 feet, it basically makes no difference. The distance is the big thing. So that's if they are they correct later. Do I push them? I think the way that I've been rolling it in the solo game is that I put them immediately back on track. They realize they're off track. They reorient themselves to where they think they need to go. I think that generally requires them to find a landmark, something, or get some new piece of information that allows them to reorient. But if not, I could also use the same grenade rules to push them closer to where they need to get to. If you're not familiar with the grenade rules, it's generally, and kind of depends on what system. If you're using a square grid or a hex grid. So I use a hex grid, so that's 1d6 for direction, 24. So if you're trying to, you know where the place is, and let's say that you miss it, you'll roll a d6. Let's say I roll a. I'm trying to imagine in my head the way that I orient my hexes. So if you've watched let's say I roll a 5. So, all right, 5 for the direction. So I know that they are off. They think the direction they're heading is more westerly than it actually is. And then the d4 for distance is how many hexes to the west that they are off by. So it might be, oh, they're 3 hexes off to the west. They're now traveling in the wrong direction, which is important if you are doing like an itinerary, or they have gotten some clues to be like, okay, once you hit the river, you need to turn west, and once you see Skull Mountain or whatever, and dum landmark, and you're making up fantasy BS. You need to head northeast for half a day or whatever. So if they miss that one, directions will stop making sense if you're using an itinerary, which I highly recommend. It makes this stuff a lot more interesting. And this would also be like I need to talk about like hitting the box, which is a search box. This is one of those visual navigation things. Again, games generally made by people who have never done this kind of stuff before, and that's not wrong. There's nothing bad about it. I've never swung a sword. It doesn't mean that I can't model combat. So it's just slightly different. Like hitting the box is like the visual acuity, like visual reference for finding directions. Is like how close do you have to be to a landmark to recognize the landmark? So adding some rules for that, because I like to use itineraries, like I said, where it's just like a list. It's like in the like Google Map, but just the directions for it and not getting the map. Be like, okay, but what if you miss that exit on the highway or whatever? It's like now the itinerary, the list of directions is not going to help you. So your only chance is to like turn back around and go back to the exit. But if you know that you missed the exit and you know that you need to go east or whatever, you can get off of the next exit and just head east, knowing that you are slightly further away than you need to be, and you can readjust for that. And once you get close, you can turn and head. And I was thinking about going north, so going south. Soon you're going to hit that cross street that you're going to notice the name up because it's the exit that it said to get off on. And you get on that street, so you will get into the search box. You will hit the box, so you will know that recognize the area that you need to make your adjustment. And hitting the box is also about like finding the actual destination. Right. Part of that's going to be sight lines. Nearby hexes. And it'll be like seeing high and low hexes. Seeing from high hexes. Usually when I'm doing hex crawling, I think if you watch the solo RPG, because we've been doing a lot of hex crawling right now, because they've been in an area that they don't know. So we're doing hex crawling because they don't know what they're going to come across. One of the things that we look at is like, okay, they really only know the biomes of the immediate hexes around them. But if they go up onto, let's say, like a hilled hex, they can see, because of the elevation, they can see a little bit further. So they might be able to see the next layer of hexes out. So we can do the 2d6 biodiversity for all of those. And then if they, for whatever reason, climbed up on a mountain, I don't know why they do that. You generally try to avoid mountains most of the time because the terrain slows you down. You could do another hex out, and now they can see like 3 hexes further. And that gives them a much better idea of being able to find the things that they need to find while they're hex crawling, if they're looking for a very specific destination or just trying to get a lay of the land. So now there's a reason to want to go through those more difficult terrains because it gives you the opportunity to like look out and do boop, 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 and looking around. So, let's do this. And I kind of, do I want to change those arrangements? Maybe. Maybe I'll change those. Easily. I guess usually travel is done by hex to hex. You're designing it to be several hexes at the same time or going to a city or land all at once. Oh, yeah, no. It is for hex to hex travel, but there is this opportunity is like if you get to an elevation, your ability to see how much further out where things are gives you the opportunity to be able to see more stuff. That way you know what direction you might want to head rather than having to forcefully go into that hex beforehand. That's the only difference. And so it's not really meant to handle several hexes at a time, so it's just like you can kind of see. Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit like Fog of War. So you don't see the whole map. Yes, I generally do not give when I'm running, I generally do not get the PCs the whole map to look at. If it's supposed to be an area that they don't know what the land is, if they're not familiar with the land, then they're not going to have a map of it. Certainly not a map that's going to give them that sort of like detailed idea. I might sketch that stuff out maybe. Like the game that I'm running for my friends right now is all set on an island. Uh, they have never been to this island before. They don't know anything about the island. So anytime that they get off the main roads, they have to we go into hex crawling mode. And the funny thing is, like, they constantly get turned around about directions. But to this point, and we're like 40 sessions into this campaign. At no point has any of my players actually just tried to make a map of the island, which I think is hilarious. They have no point if they decided, hey, maybe I should try to make a map of the island. Like, nope. That's why you guys keep getting turned around. Drawing is hard. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just need to know where you're going. And doing like a little point crawl thing would be helpful. Because sometimes I'll be like, okay, so you guys are going back to Pale, right? Yeah, so we're gonna head east. I'm like, Pale is not east. Pale south. So like it's south. I thought it was east. Like, no, you guys are like on the north half of the island. You guys are far away from Pale. It's just fun playing with players like that. Uh, I enjoy it. It's fun. I'm just constantly surprised that at no point, including we do have like somebody who is a trained artist in our group who is not trying to draw the map, which I think is very funny. We also have somebody who's like who keeps stuff, keeps track of things in like spreadsheets, also not trying to like come up with some way to figure out, okay, where was this place at? How far away was it from this place? Even though their brain definitely works that way. I find it funny that they just don't, I don't know. They're not, it's like seeing 2 and 2 and not trying to put them together to make 4. Very funny. All right, hex crawling. Crawl to adjacent hex, search the current hex in the travel day. Step 3. Yeah. Yeah. Trying to make the steps, right? So step 1 would be morning travel prep. And like not what I'm trying to do. I guess I should probably just call it like step 1. All right. Step 2, hex crawling. But always happy to find another exploration lover. I'm big time explorer player. So I force my friends, I strong arm them having to play exploration stuff for me. But they're good sports spots. All right, so step 2 is hex crawling. Either we'll just be crawl to new hex. They enter new hex. Search the current hex. You can enter the. You know what? I'm gonna swap these two because I think more than likely most operations are going to be that. You're either gonna crawl to that. They're gonna end the travel day. Go to camp. We've got our entering new hex. Enter the new hex. We'll need to figure out what biome the hex is. If I need this, like I said, with the island that I'm running for my current campaign, that's all mapped out. So I don't need to do this portion of the step. But uh, if you want to improv that, or like you're doing like our game where you're doing a little bit of a solo game, and you don't want to know that stuff ahead of time, whether you're running for yourself or somebody else, I use a table like this. I just drop it in so I know. We apply our pace modifiers, blah blah blah. We append those to our pacing. We increase our effort DC. We're changing the name of this. And roll con saves if the PCs are pushing. They need to push because they are already exhausted. Or exerted? Maybe exerted because exhausted. Exhaustion. And this is all good. And I think that's it. I think I'm good with everything else that's on here. There's just some extra stuff that I want to add in, or at least tie to other stuff that I've already created. Like I want to tie in like the weather stuff because I already have that weather hex flower that I've used. If you guys haven't seen, go watch any of the solo RPG stuff, and you'll see me do that. We update the calendar date. We do our weather. We adjust our DC necessary, and then we've got our things that are going to impact hex crawling and our dials that allow us to change stuff. We've got a good mix. We're like almost 1-to-1 here. So I'm thinking if I take gear and I break gear and helpers out, maybe. Our gear would be stuff like be like a tire, vehicle. These all kind of do, yeah, but they all do different stuff. So we've got the things that are going to impact our hex crawling, and then each dial. So ideally, what I want to do is be able to match each one to something different for most of it. This will be plus or minus. I could always move the die up. That would also be fun. But that might be a little OP. I have to think about that for a second. I have to sit down and do some math and see like, oh, what does advantage 2d4 look like? Roll 2d4, drop the lowest, versus 2d4, drop the highest. How's that look versus rolling a 1d6 or a 1d8? Or maybe having static modifiers. I try to avoid static modifiers because 5e 5.5 are not systems built to handle static modifiers, despite the new exhaustion rules are static modifiers, which none of the rest of the game is designed that way. In fact, intentionally was designed to avoid doing that. One of the things where I'm like, some of the 2024 changes, I'm just like, I don't understand these changes. Some are good, some are really good. Others are like, I don't know why this didn't feel like it needed to be changed. All right, but I think that leaves us in a good spot. So now I know that the rest of is just going to be me sitting down and noodling with this stuff, figure out because these are the changes that I want to make, and then the other stuff is just about like pulling stuff in and figuring out like how is this weather going to append to stuff, how what's going to get moved where and why. And that's not going to be interesting to watch. That's going to be me doing a lot of this. So I think that that's a good place to go ahead and probably end this stream. Obviously, if you guys like this kind of content, hey, we do a lot of this. So go ahead and like this content. If you want to see more of it, go ahead and give us a little subscription or a little follow, depending on what platform you're on, whether you're on over on the Twitch or if you're over on YouTube, whichever one. You can give us a follow. It's at RedRaggedFiend on both places, as well as other socials. You can find me out there. We've got some pay what you want stuff over on Drive Through RPG. We've of course got the blog. All this stuff's down in the description. I don't go over it. And thanks for hanging out with me. This Saturday, we're going to jump in and we're gonna do a solo RPG. We're gonna find out what the Judger of Fate wants from Reed, and if Reed can figure out how to get back to the world of the living, or if his companions are actually going to be able to get him resurrected through Druid marks. They are running a little shy on days before that gentle repose wears off, and if it wears off, Barislav might make him an undead. So hopefully that doesn't happen, because I don't think that's what Reed wants. I think we figured that out. But yeah, make sure to tune in on Saturdays when we take care of that. Otherwise, we generally stream on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays. That's our usual schedule. I think that's it. Thanks so much for hanging out, guys. And I love the subscription. Thank you so much. Do appreciate it. And I'll see you guys real soon. All right. Bye bye.